And welcome back to one of the final sessions of today's first day of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. Let's think of it as the American session. I'd now like to welcome our next guest, General and former National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, who's working today at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and whose most recent book, Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World, gives us a tour of America's grand strategy for defending freedom and democracy around the world. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Ryan, it's great to be with all of you. Thank you.
We're just so excited to be here at a real live event and that you got up early to come and join us for it. Now, sir, as a soldier and as someone who considers themselves an outsider in the political system, how did you process the assault on Capitol Hill January 6th?
Well, Ryan, I think like all Americans, I was very disappointed, obviously, to see the President of the United States actually encouraging an assault on the first branch of government is something I thought I would never see, even as crazy as the vitriolic election had been. But I think, Ryan, it's time for us to be more confident, right? I think of course, as the Secretary General said, our democracy proved very resilient after that assault. I mean, and I think our founders were pretty brilliant in ensuring that the executive branch actually has no say in the transition of government. And of course, our courts, threw out these false claims of widespread fraud during the election. So I think it's time for Americans, and I think citizens of all democratic countries to be confident in democracy as their form of government and to celebrate the fact that we do have a say in how we're governed, unlike authoritarian regimes.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that citizens have to, in effect, go around the divided political parties to assert that confidence and to reposition America as the world's democratic leader? Or how much do you have to rely on the parties themselves, and how much do you need to go around them is my question.
Right. I think we need to go around them. I think that we have to demand more of our elected officials and politicians. We have to demand that they no longer try to score partisan political points at the expense of our democratic principles and at the expense of confidence in our democratic processes and institutions. But hey, we don't have to wait for that, right? We can convene our fellow Americans. We can convene our fellow citizens in wherever we are in our society. And I think what we really need to do is develop a common agenda for emerging from the traumas of the past year, which is, of course, it's a pandemic, it's a recession, it is the social divisions that we've seen in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and the anger over unequal treatment under the law, and then it is this assault on our democracy that we've seen, and the partisanship that is, and the polarization, right, that is pitting Americans against each other. And diminishing our confidence in who we are as a people. And we all have a role in restoring that confidence, Ryan.
Mm-hmm. Now, thinking externally again, give us a sense of where you see the biggest threats to democracy globally. I think we've sometimes fallen in the trap of thinking, oh, now it's Russia, now it's China. Might be all of them, and I'd love to hear your sense of the priorities.
Well, I think it's certainly the Chinese Communist Party. I would put that at the very top, and I think it's very important for us to always, use the qualifier that China is not monolithic or homogeneous. Our problem is, and I think the whole world's problem is with China's promotion of its authoritarian mercantilist model. It's stifling of human freedom, not only within its own borders, and with a campaign of slow genocide in Xinjiang, the extension of the party's repressive arm in Hong Kong, the race to perfect this technologically enabled Orwellian police state across the country, the taking of hostages as a means of advancing its interests. I'm talking about Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig from Canada, but others as well. The absolute absence of rule of law. But what should concern all of us is the active export of this model. And look at the countries where China has succeeded, right, in bolstering authoritarian regimes. It's not a pretty picture in Cambodia or Laos or Zimbabwe, right? So I think it's very important for us to recognize that the promotion of democratic governance, representative governments, rule of law, freedom of speech, tolerance, and all the principles we hold dear. It's not just an exercise in altruism. It's actually the best way to compete with this very dangerous authoritarian model that China's promoting. Because I think we have to all recognize if the Chinese Communist Party succeeds, our world will be less free, less prosperous, and less safe.
I want to get your feedback on two possible ideas related to that. The first being what Anders Fogh Rasmussen has been proposing as a kind of economic version of NATO's Article 5 collective defense clause as a way for democracies to organize themselves against authoritarian bullying. And then the second idea that comes from Dominic Raab in Britain, where he's essentially saying Western countries need to club together and offer some kind of alternative to Belt and Road as a way to engage with those kind of fence-sitting countries, let's say. Not necessarily democracies, but the ones open to Chinese investment and persuasion. Would you back those two ideas?
I back both of those ideas and many, many more, Ryan. I think what we're recognizing now is that we vacated key arenas of competition based on the flawed assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules. And as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy and then liberalize its form of governance. Of course, we know the opposite is the case. And it's time for us to return to these arenas of competition and recognize really how severe the threat is from China's strategy of what I describe in Battlegrounds. It's really a strategy of co-option, coercion, and concealment. And it's absolutely essential that we all work together so the party can't take this divide and conquer approach against us. And so this idea of a T12 of democratic countries that work together on emerging technologies to ensure that the People's Liberation Army doesn't gain a differential advantage over us and be able to intensify its campaign of coercion, create areas of exclusionary areas of primacy across the Indo-Pacific, and create servile relationships with countries across the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And then also we have to ensure, I think, that we set the right standards, data standards, internet privacy standards that are conducive to democratic governance and that protect against the kind of severe oppression that we see in China. So, gosh, there's lots on the agenda going forward. I'm really encouraged, though, I think, by the increasing recognition that we're in this competition. I think the EU. I'm sorry, I love my European brothers and sisters, but hey, I think it's time to kind of stiffen our spine a little bit on this competition within Europe. I think there are many who are getting the word on it.
The investment agreement is falling apart. That's the word on the street this week.
That's good. No, I think that the greatest source we have for encouraging multinational cooperation is the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping. I think we ought to send him flowers and a box of chocolates and say, hey, thank you for helping us realize that we're in this competition.
Well, I hope former President Trump is not listening to that. That gives me a chance to ask you about that experience. You were a front row witness and I guess at times a participant in the formulation of that tougher stance towards China. My assessment would be it got the two parties to strategic alignment on the China threat, but there's still a huge amount of tactical division. Tell us, where did America first fall short as a policy, and what's your prescription for taking it further than it's gone so far?
Well, I think it depends on what you. America First was always a terrible, terrible slogan, right? Because it was evocative of the severe form of isolationism in the 30s. You know, in the midst or in the wake of the Great Depression, it was associated with jingoistic nationalism, various forms of bigotry in that period.
Was there debate about that, or was it just a no-go area and the president that was his policy and that was it?
No, actually, I think if you read the National Security Strategy of December 2017 and you just do a word search for America First and delete that phrase, it makes complete sense, right? Because I think that National Security Strategy, the adjustments within it were long overdue, Ryan. As I mentioned, we were re-entering arenas of competition. That document, and I think the declassified Indo-Pacific strategy that is now available, it really highlighted the very important aspect of our policy as being multinational cooperation. And despite the noise and the gratuitous insults of allies and so forth, there actually was a very high degree of multinational cooperation on these issues, even during the Trump administration. I see that expanding, being reinforced in the Biden administration. And I would say, in particular, the competition with China is an area where there's tremendous bipartisan support, right? And we ought to celebrate that, right? Because that doesn't happen every day these days in the United States. So I think there'll be tremendous continuity, as I mentioned, for two reasons. One is that we worked very hard to generate bipartisan support for this policy to begin with, and the second reason is, of course, it's Xi Jinping. You know, when the PLA is bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, when they are ramming vessels in the South China Sea, and engaging in what would be the largest land grab, so to speak, in history, in an area through which 1/3 of the world's trade flows, the economic coercion of Australia, the many threats to Taiwan, the massive cyber attacks against our medical research facilities in the midst of a pandemic, the adding insult to injury with this wolf warrior diplomacy, the threats to Japan and the Senkakus. Okay, I mean, we begin to get the picture that this is not a U.S.-China problem. You know, this is a world China problem, and the choice isn't between Washington and Beijing. The choice is between sovereignty and servitude. So I really think that the prospects for expanding multinational cooperation, not only to just compete directly with China, but to strengthen our own societies, to strengthen our own economic systems. I think everybody understands that now, and it's time to work together in a more concerted manner.
That brings two forums to mind. The Quad Alliance, which Biden's picked up again now. I'd love to know where you would like to see that in the next 2 or 3 years. And then possibly expanding the Five Eyes intelligence network to include either Japan or possibly South Korea as well. It feels like that's a step towards not necessarily an Asian NATO, but it's getting us beyond the sort of romp that it is at the moment.
Right. And of course, there are multiple dimensions in which the Quad is valuable. I would say certainly, first and foremost, from an economic and a technological competition, it's really, really important. And I would add to the Quad the European Union and the UK, because if the world's largest economies work together, it's really impossible for China to divide and conquer against us. And the areas that we have to work together, as I mentioned, are emerging data standards and of course, critical infrastructure, especially communications infrastructure. I mean, this whole idea that you would allow Huawei into your country. I mean, I think we just ask our friends, hey, do you really expect the Chinese Communist Party to treat your citizens better than they treat their own people? So I think that this is an area that is expanding in terms of economic cooperation. The Quad is also important, I think, increasingly for defense cooperation. Right? It's really important, I think, that we reestablish deterrence by denial. That we convince the Chinese Communist Party leaders, the People's Liberation Army, hey, you just can't accomplish your objectives through the use of force, because ultimately we all recognize that a war with China would be horrible. Right, and costly, and we have to avoid it. You know, and the way to avoid it is now, with really a theater security kind of architecture across the Indo-Pacific, that convinces China that hey, the best way for them to accomplish their objectives is through diplomacy and through joining the international order that has redounded to China's benefit. So I hope that the Chinese Communist Party leadership, if we work together, can be convinced that they can have enough of their dreams and enough of their goal of national rejuvenation without pursuing those dreams and those goals at our expense and at the expense of their own citizens.
We've got about 30 seconds left. I guess one last quick question on Russia. Is there anything the Biden administration or other democratic governments can be doing to increase the price on Russia for waging information warfare?
Yeah, I think we have to increase the cost such that it exceeds the cost that Putin factors in at the outset of his decision making. And so it probably comes no surprise to my German friends, hey, Nord Stream 2. I mean, I think really, why would you help Russia extend its coercive power over yours and European economies? I think countermeasures in the area of energy security are very important at this point. And punitive measures against the Kremlin and Putin And then also, I think efforts maybe to reach out to the Russian people and to help explain better to the Russian people how the actions of Putin and the Siloviki around him are not in their long-term interests.
That's all we got time for. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your contribution.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be with all. I wish I could have been there in person. Thank you.